The city of Vanar was loud and bright, but for 3 alien widows it was only cold and cruel. They walked the streets with tired steps, their clothes torn, and their children clinging to their hands. Every door they knocked on was the same. Every place they tried gave them only shame. At the first shop the widows bowed and asked for work. The merchant, a tall man with scales on his neck, sneered and waved them away. "We do not hire broken women," he said. His words cut deep. But the widows had no choice. They picked up their children and moved on. At the second factory, the machines roared and smoke filled the air. The widows begged the foreman for even the lowest job. "We will clean the floors, carry the waste, anything," they pleaded. The foreman laughed in their faces. "Widows are cursed. Your bad luck will ruin my factory." He slammed the gate and the sound echoed like thunder in their hearts. They tried the marketplace, where the smell of food filled the air and their hungry children cried. A baker pulled a loaf from the oven, the youngest. Widow whispered, "Please, we will work for bread, just bread." The baker shoved her back and shouted, "Get away, beggars, no one wants your hands here." The door closed, the smell of fresh bread fading behind it, and the children sobbed in their mothers' arms. The widows walked the crowded streets, but to them the city felt empty. Crowds pushed past, eyes full of disgust, whispers followed them. Some called them shadows. Others spat at their feet. They were not seen as women, not seen as mothers, only as a burden the galaxy wished to forget. As night came, the air grew colder. The widows sat with their children in an alley, their stomachs empty, their bodies weak. The eldest widow whispered, "Tomorrow we will try again." But her voice shook. For deep inside she feared there would be no tomorrow for her children. The youngest of the children, a girl with bright silver eyes, tugged on her mother's. "And Mama, why does no one want us?" she asked. The widow hugged her close and tried to smile, but her tears betrayed her. "Because they cannot see who we are, little star. They only see what they fear," she whispered. But fear could not feed a child, and rejection could not give them shelter. The widows felt the weight of despair pressing harder with every passing hour. Then came the final rejection of that day. They found a tall building with shining lights and guards at the door, a place of work for the strong and the skilled. Desperate, they approached. The eldest widow begged the guard, "We will do anything. Clean, carry, cook, please, we only ask for a chance." The guard looked them up and down and then spat on the ground. "Get lost. Widows bring only ruin. No one will ever hire you." He shoved them back into the dirt. The door slammed shut. Louder than all the others before, the children cried quietly, and the mothers held them tight. Their bodies ached. Their hope faded. It felt as if the whole city had declared them unwanted. The night deepened and the streets emptied. The widows walked slowly, their steps heavy. They wondered if the next day would only bring more doors closing in their faces. They wondered if their children would survive another week without food. But fate has strange ways. The path led them to the edge of the city, where the lights grew dim and the noise of the crowd faded. There stood a small workshop, its walls old, its roof patched with scrap metal. A single lantern glowed faintly inside, and the sound of tools echoed through the night. The widows stopped, their hearts beating fast. It was not a palace, not a factory, only a lonely place where one man worked. But for the widows, it was the last door they had strength to knock on. The eldest raised her trembling hand. Her knuckles tapped on the wood, soft at first, then harder. The children waited with wide eyes. The widows held their breath, praying for mercy, fearing another cruel rejection. For a moment, there was silence, only the sound of wind in the empty street. Then footsteps approached from inside. The door creaked and slowly it opened. Behind it stood a human, his clothes stained with grease, his face tired but calm. He looked at the 3 alien widows, their children, their empty eyes, and unlike the others, he did not shut the door. He did not spit. He did not mock. The widows stared at him in shock. For the first time that day, the door did not slam shut. The human stood in the doorway, tall and tired. His eyes were not sharp like a merchant's, not cold like a guard's. They were calm, steady, and filled with something the widows had not seen in a long time. Patience behind him. The workshop smelled of oil and smoke. Tools scattered across the tables, machines half taken apart. It was not a rich place, not shining or powerful, but it was alive. The eldest widow stepped forward, bowing her head low. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Please, we have tried everywhere. No one will hire us. No one will feed our children. If you have any work, anything at all, we will do it. We will not complain." The human said nothing at first. He looked at the three women. At the children hiding behind their skirts, he noticed their thin faces, their shaking hands, the bruises on their arms from being shoved in the streets. He noticed how they were ready to be rejected again, ready for the door to close. But instead of closing the door, he stepped aside. His voice was quiet but firm. "Come in, all of you." The widows froze. They did not move. They thought maybe he was mocking them. But his eyes held no cruelty, only tired kindness. Slowly, the middle widow guided her child inside, then the others followed. The human closed the door behind them, and for the first time that day they were not standing in the cold street. The children stared wide-eyed at the workshop. Sparks of light glimmered from a half-finished engine. The smell of warm metal filled the air. To them, it felt like stepping into another world. The human pulled out a small table. He fetched a pot from a corner stove. From it came the smell of stew, simple but real. He placed bread on the table and said only 2 words, "Eat first." The widows hesitated. Their pride fought with their hunger, but the youngest child could not resist. She reached out, grabbed a piece of bread and took a bite. Her silver eyes filled with tears as she chewed. The other children followed, and soon the widows themselves ate. Their hands shook, but they ate until the pot was empty. The human did not sit with them. He worked quietly at his bench, fixing a broken tool. He let them eat in silence. When the food was gone, the eldest widow stood ashamed. "We cannot repay this. We have nothing to give." The human turned, wiped his hands on a cloth and shook his head. "I did not ask for payment," he said. His voice was calm but strong. "Tomorrow you can work. There is plenty to do here. Cleaning, lifting, helping with repairs. If you are willing, then you will not starve." The widows looked at one another. They could not believe his words. Every other door had told them they were worthless. Every other voice had mocked them. Yet this human offered them a chance, not out of pity, but out of simple trust. The youngest widow whispered, Why would you help us when our own kind turn us away?" The human paused, his hands resting on the broken tool. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he looked at her with steady eyes. "Because you asked. Because no one else listened. That is enough." The widows lowered their heads. They felt something strange rise in their hearts, something heavy but warm. It was hope, fragile and small, but real. That night, he gave them blankets and a corner of the workshop to sleep in. The widows curled up with their children. The youngest child laughed softly, his stomach full for the first time in weeks. The mothers cried quietly, not from shame this time, but from relief. The human worked late into the night, hammering, tightening, bolts, repairing engines. The widows watched him in silence. They saw the lines of exhaustion on his face, the roughness of his hands. He was not rich, not powerful, yet he had given them more than the wealthy merchants ever did. When the morning light came, the widows rose early. They cleaned the floor, swept the dust, organized the scattered tools. They worked with energy. Their children fetched water and carried small parts. By the time the human returned from the market, the workshop looked brighter, almost new. He raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You work fast," he said. The widows lowered their heads. "We will work harder, just let us stay." The human gave a small smile. "Then stay," he replied. Outside, the city moved as usual, cruel and cold, but inside the workshop, something different had begun. The widows had found not just food, but a place. The human had found not just helpers, but souls who wanted to fight for life as hard as he did. None of them knew that their choice would soon bring eyes upon them, that others in the city would not stay silent, for kindness in a world that thrived on cruelty was never left unchallenged. But for now, on that morning, 3 alien widows and 1 human stranger shared the same roof, and for the first time in a long time, none of them felt alone. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the cracks of the workshop roof. The widows stirred awake, their children already sitting near the cold stove, staring at the empty pot. Hunger had become a shadow that followed them every day, even after the kindness of the night before. Fear still sat heavy in their stomachs. They worried the human would change his mind, that he would push them back into the streets like all the others. But when the human returned, carrying a sack from the market, the children's eyes widened. He placed the sack on the table, pulling out bread, roots, and a few small cuts of meat. The widows gasped softly. Their people had not tasted real meat in months. The human spoke little, only pointing to the stove. Fire, water, cook. The eldest widow rushed to obey. She lit the small flame and boiled water while the others cut the roots and tore the bread. The children watched every movement with sharp eyes. Their small hands shook with eagerness. The smell of cooking rose, filling the dusty workshop with warmth. When the stew was ready, the human stepped back. He gestured for them to eat first. The widows hesitated. Shame lingered in their hearts. They were used to begging, not to being treated as workers. But the children could not wait. The silver-eyed girl grabbed a piece of bread, dipping it into the stew. Her face lit up as if the sun itself had touched her. Soon all the children were eating, laughter bubbling between bites. The sound was so rare it startled their mothers. The widows slowly began to eat too, tasting the stew with trembling lips. It was simple food, meat, roots, bread. But to them, it felt like a feast. The human did not join at first. He sat at his workbench, turning a wrench in his hand, listening, watching. His silence was not cold, it was steady. The widows felt no mockery, no disgust, only quiet acceptance. At last, when most of the food was gone, he took a small portion for himself, eating slowly as though he had no hurry in the world. The eldest widow looked at him, her voice quiet but firm. "We will repay this. We will work hard, no matter what task you give us. Just do not send us away." The human lifted his eyes from his bowl. He studied her face, lined with exhaustion yet still strong. Then he gave a small nod. "Work is enough," he said, "and your children will not go hungry while you are here." The widows lowered their heads. Relief spread through their hearts. It felt unreal, as if they had stepped into a dream. They had asked for bread in the marketplace and been spat on. They had begged at factories and been shoved aside. Yet here, in a broken workshop, a stranger had given them food without mocking their worth. After the meal, the widows moved quickly, eager to show their gratitude. They scrubbed the floor, stacked the tools neatly, and washed the bowls. The youngest widow sang softly to her child as she worked, a song she thought she had forgotten. The sound filled the workshop with life. The children played near the old machines. Their laughter echoed against the metal walls. It was a fragile happiness, but it was real. The widows could see color return. To their children's faces, they could hear energy in their voices. The weight of despair began to lift, if only a little. The human kept working at his bench, fixing a broken generator. Yet every so often he glanced at them. His lips twitched into the smallest of smiles. He had lived alone for a long time, surrounded only by metal and silence. Now there was laughter. Now there was warmth. As evening came, the widows prepared a second small meal with the leftovers. The human joined them this time, sitting at the table. The children crowded close, staring at him with wide, curious eyes. One brave boy asked, "Why are your hands so black?" Pointing at the grease, the human chuckled, wiping them on a rag. "Because I work with machines," he answered. The children laughed, imitating him, smearing dirt on their own hands. The widows scolded them gently, but even their scolding was softened by smiles. For one night, the workshop was not just a place of tools and broken engines. It was a home. Yet outside, the city did not forget. Neighbors whispered when they saw alien widows enter the human's workshop. Merchants frowned when they noticed the women buying scraps of food, Some said the human was a fool. Others muttered that widows carried curses. Rumors began to spread like smoke. The widows sensed it. They felt eyes watching them when they fetched water. They heard the whispers when they walked past. Fear gnawed at them, but inside the workshop they still found safety. The human never wavered. His words were few, but each one carried weight. You are not leaving. Ignore them. That night, as the widows lay down on their blankets, the eldest whispered to the others, "This is more than a meal, sisters. This is the first time we are seen as people again." The others nodded, holding their children close. The workshop creaked in, the night wind. The human worked late, the sound of his hammer echoing through the dark. For the widows, the first meal was more than food. It was the spark of hope, the beginning of a fight they did not yet know was coming. The sun rose over Vaynar, painting the city in pale light. The marketplace roared to life with noise. But inside, the human's workshop, the sound was different. It was the sound of sweeping brooms, of clattering tools being placed in order, of quiet voices speaking with purpose. The three alien widows had not forgotten the promise they made. They had eaten his food, rested under his roof, and now it was time to repay him. They worked as though their lives depended on it, because they did. The eldest widow began by scrubbing the dusty floor. Her hands were raw, but she did not slow. She wanted the place to shine. She wanted to show the human she was not a burden. The middle widow sorted through broken parts scattered in crates, placing screws, wires, and bolts into neat piles. Her sharp eyes quickly learned the difference between each piece. The youngest widow, though shy, washed the rags and wiped down the tables until they gleamed. Their children also joined, carrying small pieces from one bench to another, laughing as they pretended to be helpers. The workshop, once silent and lonely, now pulsed with life. The human returned from the market that morning, his arms heavy with supplies. He stopped in the doorway, staring in quiet surprise. The floor was clean, the benches organized, the air fresh. For months he had worked alone in clutter and grease. Now the place felt almost new. "You work fast," he said simply. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of respect in it. The eldest widow lowered her head. "We will not waste the chance you gave us." From that day, a routine began. The widows rose early, cleaned the workshop, cooked the meals, and then helped with the machines. At first their hands were clumsy, but they learned quickly. The human showed them how to sand a gear, how to polish an engine plate, how to tighten bolts. Soon their alien fingers, though strange in shape, moved with skill. Customers began to notice. When they brought in machines for repair, the widows greeted them politely, carried the parts, and even worked beside the human. Jobs were finished faster. The workshop seemed brighter. Some customers whispered in surprise, "The widows are not useless after all." The children too found a place. They played in the corner, but also fetched water, held lanterns, and ran errands. Their laughter filled the workshop, and even hardened customers softened when they heard it. But outside the workshop, whispers grew darker. Rival merchants frowned. "Why are these widows being allowed to work? They will bring misfortune." Jealous workers sneered. "The human is a fool, feeding mouths that should have been left to starve." One evening, as the widows closed the shutters, a merchant passed by and spat near the door. "Cursed women, you will ruin him," he muttered. The widows froze, fear rising in their hearts. The human only tightened the latch and said calmly, "Ignore them." Yet the widows could not ignore. They remembered every rejection, every door slammed in their faces. They knew how quickly kindness could turn to cruelty. Still, inside the workshop they kept working, because the human's steady presence gave them courage. Weeks passed and the workshop's reputation grew. The repairs were faster, the place cleaner, and the widows proved they could work harder than anyone else. Customers returned, bringing more machines and even leaving tips for the widow's efforts. One afternoon, the youngest widow made a mistake. She dropped a heavy part and it cracked. Fear gripped her heart. She knelt down, whispering, "I am sorry, so sorry, please do not send us away." The human walked over, picked up the broken piece and set it aside. "Mistakes happen," he said. "Learn and do not fear." His words were simple, but to her they felt like a shield. The widows looked at one another that night. Their eyes were wet with silent tears. No one had ever spoken to them with such fairness. They had been called curses, burdens, shadows. Yet this human treated them as workers, as people. Still, shadows gathered. In the marketplace, rivals began to complain. His workshop grows busy. Because he uses cursed women, one growled. Another snarled. He should be punished for bringing them in. The city was not ready to accept the change. Back at the workshop, the widows noticed the looks, the harsh stares. They whispered to each other when the children slept. "How long before they come for us again?" The middle widow asked. The eldest answered quietly, "As long as the human stands with us, we are safe." But deep inside, she wondered if it was true. The human, however, never showed doubt. He gave them more tasks, trusted them with more work. Even when customers mocked, he replied calmly, "They are better than any of you think." The widows carried this respect in their hearts like a hidden flame. It gave them strength to keep working, to keep fighting the fear that had chained them. For so long, the workshop had become more than a place of tools and repairs. It had become a home, a sanctuary. But in the city outside, resentment was growing, and the widows knew the peace they had found would soon be tested. The workshop grew busier with every passing day. Machines arrived broken and left repaired. Customers came not only because the human was skilled, but because the widows worked. With surprising speed, their alien hands polished gears, tightened bolts, and carried heavy parts without complaint. The children too helped, running errands with laughter and bright eyes. But the more success the workshop gained, the more the city outside grew restless. Merchants whispered that the human's kindness was dangerous. Rivals grumbled that the widows were stealing their customers. Jealous workers spat on the ground when the widows passed by. At first, the widows ignored it. They had lived through worse. They told themselves that as long as the human protected them, nothing else mattered, but words became sharper and stares grew colder. One afternoon, as the eldest widow carried a crate through the market, a group of merchants blocked her path. Their leader, a thick-armed trader with gold chains, sneered at her. "You think working in a human shop makes you equal to us? You are still widows, still cursed." He shoved the crate from her arms, scattering the tools across the dirt. The crowd laughed, but the widow kept her head low, picking up the pieces with trembling hands. When she returned to the workshop, her children asked why her eyes were red. She smiled weakly and said, "It was only dust," but her sisters knew the truth. The next day, the youngest widow went to buy bread. The baker, who had once shoved her, now leaned close and whispered, "The human is a fool for taking you in. He will regret it, and so will you." She returned with the bread, but her hands shook so much she nearly dropped it. That evening, the widows whispered among themselves. "Maybe we are bringing him trouble," the middle widow said. "Maybe we should leave before the city turns against him." But the eldest shook her head. "No. He gave us a chance when no one else would. If we leave, we betray his trust." When the human overheard their fears, he spoke with his calm voice. "Let them talk, they are cowards. You work harder than any of them, that is what matters." His steady words filled them with courage, but they also knew he underestimated the hatred growing outside. The tension came to a boiling point when a group of customers entered one evening. They looked around the workshop with disdain. One spat on the floor and growled, "We will not pay for work touched by cursed widows." The human stood tall, his grease-stained hands clenched. "Then take your broken junk elsewhere," he said firmly. The men left, slamming the door behind them, but not before muttering, "You will regret this, human." That night the widows sat by the stove. Their children slept, but their own hearts were restless. "They hate us," the youngest whispered. "They will not stop until they hurt him." The middle widow nodded. "The city will not forgive his kindness." The eldest widow stared into the dim fire, her jaw tight. "Then we will stand beside him," she said. "We will not run this time." Her words carried weight, for all three remembered the countless times they had been forced to run before, chased from homes, rejected from streets, left to starve. The following week, insults turned into threats when the widows walked to the well. Men shouted at them. Curses, parasites, unwanted shadows. When they returned to the workshop, they found stones lying near the door. A warning of worse to come. The human never flinched. He worked late, fixing machines with steady hands. His calm became a shield for the widows, but they could see the storm brewing. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the human sat at the table with them. The silver-eyed girl climbed onto his lap without fear. She looked up and asked innocently, "Will they hurt us?" The widows froze, waiting for his answer. The human placed a hand on her head and said, "Not while I live." The widows exchanged glances. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a promise. For the first time in their lives, someone had declared openly that he would stand between them and harm. It filled them with both comfort and dread. Comfort because they were no longer alone. Dread because they knew the city would test that promise soon. The next morning, the workshop opened as usual, but the air felt heavy. Customers who once came with smiles now avoided the place. Rumors spread that the human was cursed too. Some whispered that the Council of Merchants was planning action. The widows worked harder than ever, their hands raw, their backs aching, their children's laughter forced. They could feel the storm pressing closer with each passing hour, the eldest widow thought to herself as she swept the floor. The doors once slammed shut in our faces, but now it feels like the whole city is ready to slam shut on him too. She tightened her grip on the broom and whispered, "But this time we will not let it happen without a fight." Outside, in the streets, shadows gathered, eyes full of hate watched the workshop, waiting for the right moment. The widows did not know when it would come, but they felt it, like the cold breath of night before a storm. The rising tension had become impossible to ignore, and soon the test of their bond with the human would arrive. The days that followed felt heavy, as if the whole city of Venar held its breath. The widows worked harder than ever, scrubbing, repairing, and lifting until their hands bled. The children laughed less, sensing the unease in their mother's eyes. Even the human grew quieter, his face stern as he worked late into the night. The whispers had turned into open threats. When the widows walked to the well, someone threw rotten fruit at them. When they returned to the workshop, hateful words were scratched into the wooden door. Cursed, ruin, leave. Each mark cut deeper than any knife. The widows scrubbed the words away, but the sting in their hearts remained. The human saw it too, but his calm never broke. "Let them waste their time," he said. "We build, they destroy, and building always lasts longer." His words steadied the widows, but they knew hatred was growing, like fire in dry grass. One night, as the workshop closed, the widows heard strange noises outside. The children clung to their mothers as shadows moved past the shutters. The human grabbed a heavy wrench and stood by the door. "Stay behind me," he said firmly. Then, it happened. A stone crashed through the window, shards of glass scattering across the floor. Another stone followed, then another. The children screamed, the widows pulled them close. Outside, voices shouted, "Throw them out, send the widows back to the streets, burn the curse from this place." The eldest widow's heart pounded. She wanted to run, to flee as she had so many times before. But when she looked at the human standing strong at the door, something inside her shifted. He was one man, yet he refused to move, refused to bow. She tightened her grip on her child and whispered, "We will not run this time." The human opened the door and stepped into the night. The mob stood outside, dozens of angry faces lit by torches. Their leader pointed at the widows through the open door. "Send them out, human, or we will tear your shop apart." The human's voice cut through, the night low but steady. "They work here, they earn their place, you want to fight? Then fight me." The crowd jeered. Some advanced, waving sticks and stones. The widows gasped, ready to throw themselves in front of their children. But then the middle widow stood beside the human, her hands trembling yet firm. "If you hurt him, you will hurt us too," she cried. The youngest widow joined her, her child clinging to her skirt. "We will not leave." The mob hesitated. They had expected fear, begging, maybe even flight. They had not expected defiance. The human raised his wrench, his face like stone. You call them cursed because you are cowards. They work harder than any of you. They are worth 10 of your idle men." His words rang out, strong and clear. The crowd roared in anger. A torch flew through the air, landing near the doorway. Flames licked at the wood. The widows scrambled to stamp it out with their bare feet, pain burning through them, but they did not stop. They would not let their only shelter turn to ash. Inside, the children cried, their voices sharp with terror. The sound cut through the night. For a moment, the mob faltered. Some lowered their torches, their eyes flicking between the humans' unyielding stance and the widow's desperate courage. The eldest widow stepped forward, her voice breaking but loud. "We begged you for bread, for work, for mercy. You gave us nothing. You spit on us. You shoved our children. Yet this human gave us a chance. And you would destroy him for it? Who is cursed now? You or us?" Silence fell for a heartbeat. The mob shifted uneasily. Some muttered, some turned their eyes away. The human took the chance and raised his voice once more. "Go home, all of you. I will not throw them out. If you come again, you will face me." One by one, the crowd began to break. Some dropped their torches, some slunk back into the shadows. Their anger cracked by the sight of a human and 3 widows standing side by side. Only a few lingered, but even they backed away, muttering empty threats. The night grew quiet again. The street empty. The widows collapsed against the doorway, shaking with exhaustion. The children clung to them, still sobbing. The human lowered his wrench and sighed, his shoulders heavy but his eyes still steady. The youngest widow whispered, "Why did you not run when so many came against you?" He looked at her, his answer simple, "Because someone must stand. If no one does, then the world belongs to the cruel." The widows wept softly, not from fear this time, but from gratitude. They had found more than food, more than shelter. They had found someone who believed they were worth defending. That night, the workshop stood scarred with broken glass and burned wood, but it still stood, and so did they. The widows knew the breaking point had come, but they had not broken. The night after the mob attack was long and restless. The widows barely slept. Every time a door creaked or the wind rattled the shutters, their hearts jumped with fear. The children clung tightly to their mothers, whispering that the angry faces would return. The human did not sleep much either. He sat by the broken window, with his wrench resting beside him, watching the dark streets outside. His body was tired, but his mind sharp. He knew the mob might come again, and next time they might not back down. By morning, the workshop smelled of smoke and dust. The widows rose early, though their limbs ached and their eyes were swollen from tears. Instead of breaking down, they began to clean, sweeping away the glass, scrubbing the scorch marks on the door, patching the broken boards with scraps. The human watched them quietly, his lips pressed into a thin line. He saw their determination, their refusal to surrender, and something in his heart grew heavier, but also brighter. Later that day, a small crowd gathered outside, but this time it was not the mob. It was neighbors, shopkeepers, even a few customers. They stared at the workshop in silence. Some of them looked ashamed, others curious. Whispers moved through the crowd. They did not leave. The human fought for them. The widows stayed. One old customer stepped forward and placed a machine on the counter. "Can you repair this?" he asked. His voice was cautious but not hostile. The human nodded. "Yes." The widows stepped in, carrying the machine to the bench, their heads held high. From that day, something shifted. The mob did not vanish completely. Hatred never vanished so easily. But the open attacks slowed. The whispers of curses softened, replaced slowly by murmurs of respect. Not everyone changed, but some did, and it was enough to keep the workshop alive. The widows worked harder than ever. Their alien hands grew skilled, their movements precise. Customers who had once mocked now admitted, "The widows fix things faster than anyone else." The children grew healthier, their laughter returning like sunlight after a storm. But even as life settled, the widows knew one truth. None of this would have been possible without the human. He had opened his door when the galaxy slammed every other one shut. He had risked his life to stand in front of the mob. He had given them not just food, but dignity. One evening, after the last customer left, the eldest widow approached him. Her voice trembled but was firm. "We owe you more than we can ever repay. You gave us work, safety, and hope. Why? Why would a human risk everything for 3 alien widows no one else wanted?" The workshop fell silent. The other widows leaned closer, waiting for his answer. Even the children stopped their play, their silver eyes watching him with quiet curiosity. The human set down his wrench and leaned back against the bench. His voice was steady, because no one else did. "Because when I saw you standing at my door, I saw myself alone, unwanted, fighting to survive in a world that doesn't care. I could not turn away, not when I knew how it felt." The widows lowered their heads, tears slipped down their cheeks. His words pierced their hearts. For years they had been told they were curses, shadows, worthless. Yet here was someone who said he understood them, who saw them not as burdens, but as mirrors of his own struggle. The youngest widow whispered, "And if the mob returns? If the city turns on you again because of us?" The human looked at her with calm, unshaken eyes. "Then let them come. I will not send you away. You are part of this workshop now, part of this home. That is my choice." The widows wept openly then, not with despair but with relief, for the first time since their husbands had died, since the city had turned against them. They felt they belonged somewhere. They were not curses. They were not shadows. They were workers, mothers, and people worth protecting. From that day forward, the workshop was no longer just a place of machines. It became a symbol. The widows walked through the market with their heads higher. The children laughed without fear. And the human, though still tired and worn, stood taller, for he had made a choice that no one else dared make. Word spread slowly beyond the city. Travelers whispered of a workshop where a human worked side by side with alien widows, where kindness triumphed over cruelty, where strength was not in fists, or wealth but in courage. Some mocked the story, others dismissed it, but some listened, and hope began to ripple outward. The widows knew challenges would still come. The world did not change overnight, but they also knew they would face it together, side by side with the human who had chosen them. On quiet nights when the children were asleep, the widows would sit by the fire and whisper to each other, "Do you remember the doors that slammed shut on us?" One would ask. The others would nod, and the eldest would add softly, "Yes, but one door opened, and that was enough to change everything." And in the heart of Vanar, the workshop's lantern glowed each night, not just with light, but with a promise born from a human's choice to see worth where others saw only ruin.